by love and honor. Lady Isabel of Westmere had spent months evading capture, always a step ahead of the king's knights. But when Sir Gareth Fitzrohan finally caught her, he did not raise his blade. Instead, he smirked, tilting his head. "You are a difficult woman to catch, my lady," he murmured. "Shall we see if you are just as difficult to tame?" Chapter 1. The Falcon's Flight. The wind whipped at Lady Isabel's cloak, tugging the edges of the rough-spun wool as she urged her mare, Whisper, onward. The gray of the dawn was just beginning to bleed into the inky black of the night sky, painting the edges of the forest with a fragile, silvery light. Behind her, the baying of hounds echoed, a chilling symphony that spoke of pursuit, of capture, of the king's relentless justice. Or, perhaps more accurately, the king's relentless injustice. Isabel clenched her jaw, her breath misting in the frigid air. Westmere, her home, her sanctuary, was still hours away, a haven nestled deep within the protective embrace of the ancient forest. But the forest itself held dangers, both natural and man-made. Outlaws, wild beasts, and the ever-present threat of the king's men. Each shadow seemed to hold a potential enemy. She had been running for months, ever since the false accusations had been leveled against her family, ever since her brother, Thomas, had been branded a traitor and forced to flee into exile. Treason. The word itself felt like a poisoned arrow lodged in her heart. The very notion that her brother, loyal, honorable Thomas, could have plotted against King Edward was ludicrous. But in these treacherous times, truth was a fragile thing, easily twisted and manipulated by those with power and ambition. Isabel's fingers tightened around the reins. She had to reach Westmere. There, within its familiar walls, she could find some measure of safety, some respite from the relentless chase. There, she could perhaps find a way to clear her brother's name, to expose the lies that had shattered her world. The sound of hooves, closer now, spurred her onward. Whisper, sensing her mistress's urgency, stretched her legs, the rhythmic thud of her hooves against the frozen earth a desperate counterpoint to the approaching danger. Isabel risked a glance over her shoulder. Through the skeletal branches of the trees, she caught a glimpse of movement, the glint of steel under the nascent light. Knights. The king's knights. And at their head a shiver ran down her spine, a cold premonition that settled heavily in the pit of her stomach. Even from this distance, she recognized the distinctive banner, the black falcon against a field of crimson. Sir Gareth Fitzrohan. The king's hound, they called him. A man renowned for his unwavering loyalty, his ruthless efficiency, and his uncanny ability to track down even the most elusive prey. Isabel pressed her heels into Whisper's flanks. Fear, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She had heard tales of Fitzrohan, whispers of his unwavering dedication to the king, his cold, unyielding demeanor. He was a man who showed no mercy, a man who would stop at nothing to fulfill his duty. The forest floor was uneven, treacherous with hidden roots and fallen branches. Whisper stumbled, nearly throwing Isabel from the saddle. She clung on, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The hounds were closer now, their baying a deafening roar in her ears. She could feel the presence of the knights behind her, a palpable weight pressing down on her, suffocating her. The air crackled with tension, with the inevitability of capture. Isabel closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, a silent prayer escaping her lips. God, grant me strength. Grant me courage. Grant me a way to escape this trap. When she opened her eyes, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She would not surrender. She would not be taken without a fight. She was Isabel of Westmere, and she would not be broken. She urged Whisper forward, guiding her through a narrow gap between two ancient oaks, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers reaching out to grasp her. The forest thickened, the undergrowth becoming a tangled web of thorns and brambles. It was a desperate gamble, a path that would test both horse and rider to their limits. But it was her only hope. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, muffled by the dense foliage. Isabel allowed herself a small, fragile breath of relief. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had bought herself some time. But she knew, deep in her heart, that it was only a temporary reprieve. Sir Gareth Fitzrohan would not give up so easily. He was the king's hound, and she was his prey. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long, dappled shadows across the forest floor. The light filtered through the leaves, creating an ethereal, almost otherworldly beauty. But Isabel had no time to appreciate the serenity of her surroundings. Her focus was solely on survival, on reaching the sanctuary of Westmere. As Whisper navigated a particularly treacherous patch of uneven ground, a sudden, sharp pain shot through Isabel's ankle. She gasped, biting back a cry of pain. She had twisted it badly. She could feel the swelling already, the throbbing agony that made it almost impossible to put any weight on her foot. Despair threatened to engulf her. This was it then, the end of her flight. She was injured, alone, and hunted. The image of Sir Gareth Fitzrohan, his cold eyes, his unyielding expression, filled her mind. She could almost feel his presence, the inevitability of his capture. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a spark of stubborn defiance remained. She would not give up. She would not surrender. She would fight, even if it was her last breath. She owed it to her brother, to her family, to herself. With a renewed surge of determination, she urged Whisper forward, ignoring the searing pain in her ankle. Westmere was still a long way off, but she would reach it. She had to. Her life, her family's honor, depended on it. The sound of rushing water reached her ears, a faint, soothing murmur that offered a glimmer of hope. The River Lyre. It flowed along the western border of Westmere's lands. If she could reach it, if she could cross it, but even as she clung to that fragile hope, a shadow fell across her path. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and imposing, clad in gleaming steel. Sir Gareth Fitzrohan. He had found her, and in his eyes, Isabel saw not triumph, but something far more unsettling, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Something that sent a new wave of shivers, not entirely of fear, down the length of her spine. His low voice cut through the silence of the woods. Lady Isabel, your flight is over. Chapter 2. Shadows of the King's Decree. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, like the clang of a closing gate. Isabel stared at Sir Gareth, her breath caught in her throat. He sat astride a magnificent warhorse, a black stallion that shifted restlessly beneath him, its muscles rippling with barely contained power. The knight himself was a figure of imposing strength, his armor gleaming in the dappled sunlight, his face a mask of controlled composure. He was younger than she had expected, though not by much. Perhaps in his early 30s, with a face that bore the marks of both battle and hardship. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, were not cold, as the rumors had claimed, but rather intense. They seemed to see through her, to strip away her defenses and lay bare her fear, her defiance, her desperate hope. I yield, Isabel said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. There was no point in further flight. Her ankle throbbed with a fiery pain, and Whisper was exhausted, her flanks heaving with exertion. Surrender was the only option, however bitter the taste. Sir Gareth dismounted, his movements fluid and graceful, despite the weight of his armor. He approached her slowly, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, though he made no move to draw it. The black falcon on his surcoat seemed to stare at her, a silent accusation. You have led us on a merry chase, Lady Isabel, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around her. The king is not pleased. The king is misled, Isabel retorted, lifting her chin defiantly. My brother is no traitor. The accusations against him are false. A flicker of something skepticism? Curiosity? Crossed Sir Gareth's face. That is not for me to judge, my lady. My duty is to bring you before the king. He will decide your fate. Isabel's hands clenched into fists. And what of my fate? Will I be thrown into a dungeon, to rot alongside other innocent souls who have dared to question the king's wisdom? Sir Gareth's gaze remained fixed on hers, unwavering. The king is just. He will listen to your plea. Isabel scoffed. Justice? There is no justice in the king's court. Only ambition and intrigue. My brother was a victim of those who seek to climb higher on the backs of others. She winced as she shifted her weight, the pain in her ankle flaring. Sir Gareth's eyes followed the movement, his expression hardening. You are injured, he said, his voice devoid of sympathy. It is nothing, Isabel lied, trying to straighten her posture. She would not show him weakness. She would not give him the satisfaction. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. She could smell the scent of leather and steel, the faint aroma of wood smoke clinging to his clothes. It was a strangely comforting scent, in the midst of her terror. Let me see, he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Isabel hesitated, her pride warring with her practicality. She knew she needed help, but the thought of accepting it from this man, the king's hound, was almost unbearable. He reached out, his hand hovering over her injured ankle. The touch, even through her riding boot, was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to the cold steel of his armor. A shiver ran through her, a complex mixture of fear and something else. Something she couldn't quite define. I can manage, she stammered, trying to pull her foot away. But he was too quick. He knelt beside her, his hand gently but firmly grasping her ankle. His fingers probed the swollen joint, his touch surprisingly delicate. Isabel bit back a cry of pain, her face flushed. It is badly sprained, he said, his voice matter of fact. You will not be able to ride. Isabel's heart sank. This was a disaster. Without whisper, she was truly at his mercy. Sir Gareth stood, his eyes meeting hers. We will make camp here, he said. I will tend to your injury. And in the morning, we will continue our journey to the king's court. Isabel looked around at the small clearing, surrounded by the dense forest. It was a secluded spot, far from any road or village. She was utterly alone, at the mercy of this enigmatic knight. He seemed to read her thoughts. You have nothing to fear from me, Lady Isabel, he said, his voice low and reassuring. I am a knight of the realm. I have sworn an oath to uphold the law and to protect those in my charge. Isabel wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe that he was a man of honor, a man who would not harm her. But the fear, the ingrained distrust of the king's men, was too strong. He gestured to one of his men, a young squire who hurried forward, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. Set up camp, Thomas, Sir Gareth ordered. And bring me water and bandages. The squire, a fresh-faced boy with earnest eyes, nodded and set about his tasks with brisk efficiency. Sir Gareth turned back to Isabel. Come, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Let me help you dismount. He reached for her, his hands strong and sure. Isabel hesitated for a moment, then allowed him to lift her from the saddle. The pain in her ankle was excruciating, and she couldn't suppress a gasp. He held her for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching hers. There was a question in his gaze, a silent inquiry that she couldn't quite decipher. Then, he gently lowered her to the ground, supporting her weight until she was able to find her balance. As the squire busied himself with setting up camp, and the other knights tended to their horses, Isabel watched Sir Gareth. He moved with a quiet authority, his every action precise and efficient. He was a man of discipline, a man of control. But beneath that controlled exterior, she sensed something else, a hint of weariness, perhaps even a touch of sadness. The shadows of the forest deepened as the sun began to set. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the night, the hooting of owls, the rustling of leaves filled the clearing. Isabel shivered, drawing her cloak tighter around her. She was a prisoner, yes, but for now, she was also under the protection of this enigmatic knight. And as she looked into his piercing gray eyes, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Sir Gareth Fitzrohan than met the eye. A flicker of unease and an unsettling curiosity began to grow. He was the hunter and she the prize. The decree would be met. But what other shadows lurked in the king's court? Chapter 3. The Hunter's Snare. The fire crackled merrily, casting a warm, flickering glow on the small clearing. The aroma of roasting meat filled the air, mingling with the scent of pine and damp earth. Isabel sat huddled near the flames, her injured ankle propped up on a makeshift cushion of blankets. Sir Gareth had tended to it with surprising skill, binding it tightly with strips of clean linen. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, though she knew it would be days, perhaps weeks, before she could walk on it properly. She watched him across the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. He was removing his armor, piece by piece, with the practiced ease of a seasoned warrior. Beneath the steel, he wore a simple tunic of dark blue linen, which revealed the powerful muscles of his arms and chest. He moved with a quiet grace, a stark contrast to the rigid formality he had displayed earlier. He caught her gaze, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Are you comfortable, Lady Isabel?" Isabel hesitated. Comfortable was hardly the word she would use to describe her situation. She was a prisoner, on her way to face a king who believed her a traitor. But she was also warm, fed, and her injury had been tended to. "As comfortable as I can be, under the circumstances," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. He nodded, understanding her unspoken meaning. "I know this is not easy for you," he said, "but I assure you, I will do everything in my power to ensure your safety and well-being." Isabel looked at him, trying to discern the truth behind his words. Was he simply playing the role of the courteous captor? Or was there a genuine concern in his eyes? He poured himself a cup of wine from a leather flask, then offered it to her. Isabel hesitated, then accepted it. The wine was surprisingly good, warm and rich, chasing away some of the chill that had settled deep in her bones. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant murmur of the knights preparing for the night. Isabel found herself studying him, trying to unravel the enigma that was Sir Gareth Fitzrohan. He was a man of contradictions, a warrior with a gentle touch, a captor who offered comfort. "Why did you not simply kill me?" she asked suddenly, the question bursting from her lips before she could stop it. It would have been easier, and the king would have been rid of one more problem. Sir Gareth's eyes met hers, his expression serious. "I am a knight, Lady Isabel, not an assassin. I do not kill defenseless women. But I am a traitor, am I not? In the king's eyes, at least." "You are accused of treason," he corrected her. "But you have not yet been tried. I believe in justice, Lady Isabel. I believe that everyone deserves a fair hearing." Isabel's heart stirred with a flicker of hope. Perhaps he was not as unyielding as she had feared. Perhaps he was a man of honor, a man who would not blindly follow the king's orders without question. "My brother is innocent," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "He would never betray the king. He was framed by those who seek to gain power at his expense." Sir Gareth listened intently, his gaze unwavering. "Who are these enemies, Lady Isabel? Who has accused your brother?"
Isabel hesitated.
She was wary of revealing too much, of trusting this man too easily. But she also sensed that he might be her only ally, her only hope of clearing her brother's name. "Lord Beaumont," she said finally, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. "He has long coveted Westmere's lands, and my brother stood in his way." Sir Gareth's brow furrowed.
"Beaumont?"
"He is a powerful man, close to the king." "Precisely," Isabel said bitterly. "He has the king's ear, and he has used it to poison the king's mind against my brother." Sir Gareth was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I know Beaumont," he said finally. "He is a man of ambition. But I have never known him to be a liar." "Then you do not know him well enough," Isabel retorted. "He is a master of deception, a weaver of lies. He has spun a web of deceit that has ensnared my brother, and now me." Sir Gareth leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me everything, Lady Isabel. Tell me everything you know about Beaumont's plot. If you are telling the truth, I will do everything in my power to help you." Isabel's heart quickened. It was a dangerous gamble, trusting this man. But she had nothing left to lose. She had to take the chance. She began to speak, her voice low and urgent, recounting all the details of Beaumont's machinations, the subtle threats, the veiled accusations, the growing suspicion that had surrounded her brother in the weeks leading up to his flight. She spoke of the forged letters, the planted evidence, the whispered rumors that had poisoned the king's mind. Sir Gareth listened without interruption, his gaze intense, his expression unreadable. As she spoke, the fire burned lower, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. The night grew colder, and the sounds of the forest seemed to press in on them, a constant reminder of the dangers that surrounded them. When she had finished, Sir Gareth remained silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the dying embers of the fire. Isabel watched him, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. His reaction would determine her fate. He was the hunter, setting his snare not with force, but with an offer of help. Would she fall into it, or would this offer of help prove true? Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I believe you," he said, his voice low and firm. "I believe your brother is innocent, and I will help you prove it." A wave of relief, so profound it almost brought her to her knees, washed over her. But a sliver of doubt remained. He believed her, yes, but he was still bound by duty. And that duty was to the king. The snare, it seemed, had two sides. One of protection, one of fealty to a possibly corrupt crown. Chapter 4. Chains of Gold and Steel. The journey to the king's court was arduous. A relentless trek through dense forests and across windswept plains. Isabel's ankle, though improving, still throbbed with a persistent ache, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. She rode a sturdy palfrey, provided by Sir Gareth, a less spirited mount than Whisper, but more suited to her injured state. Sir Gareth rode beside her, a silent, watchful presence. He treated her with a curious mixture of courtesy and detachment, always attentive to her needs, yet maintaining a certain distance. He spoke little, but his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, seemed to follow her constantly, observing, assessing. The other knights treated her with a wary respect, keeping their distance, their expressions unreadable. They were loyal to Sir Gareth, and they would follow his orders, but they clearly regarded her as a dangerous prisoner, a potential threat. Isabel found herself increasingly drawn to Sir Gareth, despite her initial distrust. He was a man of strength and integrity, a man who seemed to genuinely believe in justice. But he was also a man bound by duty, a man sworn to serve a king who might be corrupt, a king who had already condemned her brother without a fair trial. One evening, as they made camp near a small, deserted village, Isabel found herself alone with Sir Gareth. The other knights were tending to their horses, their voices a low murmur in the twilight. "Sir Gareth," she said, her voice hesitant, "why are you helping me? You are the king's knight. Your loyalty should be to him, not to me." He looked at her, his expression serious. "My loyalty is to the truth, Lady Isabel, and to justice. If the king has been misled, if he has been deceived by Beaumont, then it is my duty to uncover the truth." "But Beaumont is powerful," Isabel said. "He has the king's ear. He will not hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in his way." "I am not afraid of Beaumont," Sir Gareth said, his voice firm. "I have faced worse enemies on the battlefield." "This is not a battlefield," Isabel retorted. "This is a court of intrigue, of whispers and lies. You cannot fight with a sword against such enemies." A faint smile touched his lips.
"Perhaps not," he said.
"But I have other weapons. I have my wits, my experience, and my reputation." Isabel looked at him, a question in her eyes. "Your reputation?" "I am known as the King's Hound," he said. "A man who is relentless in his pursuit of justice. A man who cannot be bought or intimidated. That reputation can be a powerful weapon, Lady Isabel. It can open doors, it can silence tongues, it can even influence the king." Isabel's heart stirred with a flicker of hope. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps his reputation, his unwavering commitment to justice, could be their salvation. But what if the king refuses to listen?
She asked.
What if he is too blinded by Beaumont's lies? Sir Gareth's gaze hardened. "Then I will find a way to make him listen," he said. "I will not allow an innocent man to be condemned." and I will not allow you to suffer for his supposed crimes." His words, his unwavering conviction, sent a shiver of warmth through her. She had found an ally, a protector, in the most unexpected of places. But she also knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger. Beaumont was a formidable enemy, and the king's court was a treacherous place. As the days passed, Isabel and Sir Gareth grew closer, their initial distrust slowly giving way to a fragile bond of understanding and respect. They talked for hours, sharing their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. Isabel learned of Sir Gareth's past, of his years spent fighting in the king's wars, of the losses he had suffered, the burdens he carried. He, in turn, learned of her love for Westmere, her devotion to her brother, her unwavering determination to clear his name. The chains that bound her were not just the metaphorical ones of her situation. She felt increasingly chained to this knight, bound by a growing respect and a burgeoning feeling she dared not name. He was her captor, yes, but he was also becoming something more: a confidant, a protector, perhaps even a friend. The thought, at once thrilling and dangerous, filled her. It created new chains, invisible yet strong as steel. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Sir Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. "Isabel," he said, his voice low and husky. He hesitated, his gaze searching hers. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he was about to say, and she knew that she should stop him. He was a knight, sworn to serve the king. She was a prisoner, accused of treason. Their paths should never have crossed, and they certainly should not be. But before she could speak, a shout rang out from the edge of the camp. "Riders approaching." Sir Gareth sprang to his feet, his hand instantly reaching for his sword. The moment was shattered, the fragile intimacy between them broken. The reality of their situation, the dangers that surrounded them, came crashing back. Isabel's heart sank. The chains of gold, the hopes she'd begun to weave, felt suddenly cold and heavy. Steel had interrupted them, and steel, she knew, would likely define their future. Duty called, and the king's knight would answer, leaving her to wonder what might have been, and what terrors still lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Whispers of Westmere. The riders were not enemies, but messengers from Westmere. They brought news, grim and unsettling, that cast a pall over the already tense atmosphere of the camp. Lord Beaumont, emboldened by Isabel's capture and Thomas's continued exile, had made his move. He had seized Westmere, claiming it as his own by right of the king's decree, declaring all within its lands his subjects, and all resistance treason. Isabel received the news with a mixture of fury and despair. Her home, her ancestral lands, the place where she had spent her entire life, was now in the hands of her enemy. The people she loved, the loyal servants and tenants who had served her family for generations, were now at the mercy of Beaumont's cruelty. "He cannot do this," she cried, her voice trembling with rage. "Westmere is mine. It belongs to my family." Sir Gareth placed a calming hand on her arm. "He is the king's decree," he said, his voice grim. "Without proof of his treachery, there is nothing we can do to stop him. But there must be something," Isabel pleaded. "We cannot simply allow him to steal my home, to oppress my people." Sir Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "We are on our way to the king's court," he reminded her. "That is where we will fight this battle. That is where we will expose Beaumont's lies and reclaim your birthright." But Isabel was not convinced. She knew that the king's court was a dangerous place, a labyrinth of intrigue and betrayal. Beaumont had the king's ear, and he would use his influence to ensure that she was silenced, that her accusations were dismissed. The messengers, two weathered men who had served Westmere for decades, looked at Isabel with a mixture of hope and fear. They had risked their lives to bring her this news, to plead for her help. "My lady," one of them said, his voice hoarse, "Beaumont is a cruel master. He has imposed heavy taxes, he has seized our lands, he has imprisoned those who have dared to speak against him. We beg you, my lady, you must help us." Isabel's heart ached for her people. She could not abandon them. She could not stand idly by while Beaumont destroyed everything she held dear. "I will not abandon you," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I swear to you, I will fight for Westmere. I will fight for my people. I will not rest until Beaumont is brought to justice." The messengers bowed their heads, their faces etched with gratitude. "Thank you, my lady," they said. "We have faith in you." They departed soon after, leaving Isabel and Sir Gareth alone once more. The weight of her responsibility, the burden of her people's suffering, pressed down on her. She felt overwhelmed, helpless. Sir Gareth watched her, his expression thoughtful. "You are strong, Isabel," he said. "Stronger than you know. You have the courage and the determination to fight this battle. And I will stand by your side." His words, his unwavering support, gave her a renewed surge of strength. She was not alone. She had an ally, a protector, in this enigmatic night. "But how can we fight him?" she asked. "He has the king's favor. He has the law on his side." Sir Gareth smiled, a grim, determined smile. "The law can be bent, Isabel, and the king's favor can be swayed. We will find a way. We will gather evidence. We will expose Beaumont's lies. We will turn the king against him." "And how will we do that?" Isabel asked, her voice skeptical. "We will start with Westmere," Sir Gareth said. "We will return there, secretly. We will gather information. We will speak to your people. We will find proof of Beaumont's treachery." Isabel's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. It was a dangerous plan, a reckless gamble. If they were caught, they would both be branded as traitors, and their lives would be forfeit. But it was also their only hope. "It is too dangerous," she said. "If Beaumont discovers us, he will not discover us," Sir Gareth said, his voice firm. "I know how to move unseen, how to gather information without attracting attention. I have done it many times before." Isabel looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the determination in his gaze, the unwavering commitment to justice. She knew that he was risking his life for her people. "I will go with you," she said, her voice resolute. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face.
"I knew you would," he said.
They began to plan their secret return to Westmere, laying out their strategy, anticipating the dangers, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. The whispers of her home, the cries of her people, had strengthened her resolve. She would not fail them. She would fight for her birthright, for her family, for her future. And she would do it with the king's hound, now her unexpected ally, at her side. The chains that bound them, forged in captivity and circumstance, now seemed to bind them in a common purpose, a shared destiny. And that destiny, she knew, was intertwined with the fate of Westmere. Chapter 6. A Knight's Burden. The journey back to Westmere was shrouded in secrecy. They traveled under the cover of darkness, avoiding main roads and villages, relying on Sir Gareth's knowledge of the land and his network of informants. Isabel, disguised as a simple peasant woman, her face hidden beneath a worn hood, rode alongside him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The closer they got to Westmere, the more palpable the tension became. The air seemed heavy with oppression, the silence broken only by the whispers of the wind and the occasional cry of a night bird. They saw evidence of Beaumont's cruelty everywhere: abandoned farms, deserted villages, the fearful faces of the few people they encountered. Sir Gareth, too, felt the weight of the situation. He had seen firsthand the suffering of Isabel's people, the injustice of Beaumont's rule. It stirred a deep anger within him, a righteous fury that fueled his determination to expose the truth. But he also carried a personal burden, a secret that weighed heavily on his heart. Years ago, he had served under Beaumont in a campaign against a rebellious northern lord. He had witnessed Beaumont's brutality, his ruthlessness, his willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for his own ambition. He had even, under orders, participated in acts that he now deeply regretted. He had kept silent then, bound by his oath of loyalty to his commander. But now, seeing the consequences of Beaumont's actions, seeing the suffering of Isabel and her people, he could no longer remain silent. He had a duty, not just to the king, but to his own conscience, to right the wrongs of the past. One night, as they camped in a hidden grove, Isabel noticed a change in Sir Gareth's demeanor. He was withdrawn, his eyes filled with a dark, haunted look. "Gareth," she said softly, using his given name for the first time, "what is wrong? You seem troubled." He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fire. "There are things I have done," he said, his voice low and strained, "things I am not proud of." Isabel's heart went out to him. She sensed the pain he was carrying, the burden of his past. "We all have regrets, Gareth," she said. "We all make mistakes." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anguish and self-reproach. "But these are not mere mistakes, Isabel. These are sins. Sins that I have carried with me for years." He told her then, his voice raw with emotion, of his time serving under Beaumont, of the atrocities he had witnessed, the orders he had followed. He spoke of the burning villages, the slaughtered innocents, the cries of the victims that still haunted his dreams. Isabel listened in silence, her heart aching for him. She saw the pain in his eyes, the guilt that consumed him. She understood then why he was so determined to help her, why he was so willing to risk his life to expose Beaumont's treachery. It was not just about justice, it was about redemption. "You were a soldier, Gareth," she said softly when he had finished. "You were following orders." "That is no excuse," he said bitterly. "I should have refused. I should have spoken out. I should have done something." Isabel reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You're doing something now, Gareth," she said. "You are helping me. You are fighting for justice. You are redeeming yourself." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Her words, her understanding, her unwavering belief in him, eased the burden he carried, if only a little. "Thank you, Isabel," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You have given me hope." Their hands remained clasped, a silent connection between them. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Isabel felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling that went beyond gratitude, beyond friendship. She saw in Gareth not just a knight, a protector, but a man of deep compassion, a man of integrity, a man who was struggling to overcome his past and forge a better future. And she realized, with a sudden, startling clarity, that she was falling in love with him. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. He was the king's knight, a man sworn to uphold the law. She was a prisoner, accused of treason. Their love was forbidden, impossible. And yet, it felt inevitable, a force as powerful and undeniable as the tides. He squeezed her hand, his eyes searching hers. He saw the change in her expression, the unspoken emotion that mirrored his own. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice thick with longing. But before he could say more, a twig snapped nearby. They both froze, instantly alert. Gareth released her hand, his body tensing, his hand reaching for his sword. The moment was broken, the fragile intimacy shattered. The knight's burden, it seemed, extended beyond his past. It included the weight of a love he could not, should not pursue. And yet, it was there, a silent, powerful force, adding another layer of complexity to their already perilous mission. The dangers of Westmere and the secrets of his past now mingled with the unspoken promise of a love that could destroy them both. Chapter 7. The Heart of the Fortress. They reached Westmere under the cover of a moonless night, the ancient castle looming before them like a slumbering giant. The once familiar walls, now under Beaumont's control, seemed alien and menacing. The flickering torches along the battlements cast eerie shadows, and the silence was broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the call of a night watchman. Isabel's heart ached with a mixture of longing and fear. This was her home, the place where she had grown up, the place where she had known love and laughter. But now, it felt like a prison, a fortress occupied by her enemy. Sir Gareth, ever vigilant, guided them through the shadows, avoiding the main gates and the well-trodden paths. He knew of a secret passage, a narrow tunnel that led from the forest into the castle cellars, a passage known only to a handful of trusted servants. They entered the tunnel, the air cool and damp, the darkness absolute. Isabel stumbled, her injured ankle protesting with every step. Gareth's hand, strong and reassuring, steadied her. "We are almost there," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. The tunnel opened into a vast, dimly lit cellar, filled with barrels of wine and ale, sacks of grain, and other provisions. The air smelled of damp earth and aged wood. Gareth led her to a hidden door, concealed behind a stack of empty barrels. He pressed a hidden lever, and the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase that led upwards. "This will take us to the old servants' quarters," he explained. "They are mostly deserted now, since Beaumont brought in his own people. We should be safe there for a while at least." They climbed the stairs, the silence broken only by the creaking of the ancient wood and the pounding of Isabel's heart. She felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition of danger. They emerged into a long, dusty corridor, lined with closed doors. The air was stale and heavy, the silence oppressive. Gareth led her to a small, sparsely furnished room, once used by a junior chambermaid. It was clean, but bare, with only a narrow bed, a small table, and a single chair. A single, dusty window looked out onto the castle courtyard.
"We will stay here tonight," Gareth said.
"Tomorrow, we will begin our investigation. We need to find evidence of Beaumont's treachery, something that will convince the king." Isabel nodded, her mind racing. She knew that time was of the essence. Beaumont was tightening his grip on Westmere, and the longer they delayed, the more difficult it would be to dislodge him. They spent the night in the small room, sharing a meager meal of bread and cheese that Gareth had procured from the cellar. They spoke little, their thoughts preoccupied with the dangers that lay ahead. Isabel found it difficult to sleep. She tossed and turned on the narrow bed, her mind filled with images of her home, her people, her brother. She thought of Gareth, of his courage, his integrity, his unwavering support. And she thought of the forbidden love that was blossoming between them, a love that could destroy them both. As dawn approached, Isabel finally drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with shadows and whispers. She dreamed of Beaumont, his face contorted with cruelty, his eyes burning with hatred. She dreamed of her brother, Thomas, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes pleading for help. And she dreamed of Gareth, his strong arms around her, his lips on hers, a promise of a love that could never be. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The room was still dark, the only light filtering through the dusty window. Gareth was sitting in the chair, his head in his hands. He looked up as she stirred, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right, Isabel?" he asked. "Just a bad dream," she said, trying to shake off the lingering fear. He rose and came to her, his hand gently touching her cheek. "We will get through this, Isabel," he said. "I promise you." His touch, his words, his unwavering belief in her, gave her a renewed surge of strength. She would not be defeated. She would fight for her home, for her people, for her brother. And she would fight for the love that she had found in the most unexpected of places, the love that was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. The heart of the fortress, her own heart, was now the battleground. And within its chambers, a war raged between duty, desire, and the desperate hope for a future that seemed impossibly distant. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. The next few days were a blur of whispered conversations, clandestine meetings, and furtive explorations of the castle. Isabel and Sir Gareth, disguised as servants, moved through the shadows, gathering information, piecing together the puzzle of Beaumont's treachery. They spoke to old retainers, loyal servants who had served Westmere for generations, who had witnessed Beaumont's cruelty firsthand. They learned of the exorbitant taxes he had imposed, the lands he had seized, the people he had imprisoned or driven into exile. They heard tales of forged documents, planted evidence, and whispered threats. Isabel's heart ached with every new revelation, every new piece of evidence that confirmed Beaumont's guilt. She felt a growing rage, a burning desire for justice, not just for herself and her brother, but for all the people who had suffered under Beaumont's tyranny. Sir Gareth, too, was deeply affected by what they learned. He saw the echoes of his own past, the shadows of the atrocities he had witnessed, the orders he had followed under Beaumont's command. He felt a renewed sense of guilt, a burning determination to atone for his past sins. One evening, as they were exploring the old library, a vast, dusty chamber filled with ancient tomes and forgotten scrolls, Isabel stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside, she found a small, wooden box, intricately carved with the Westmere crest. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the box. It had belonged to her father, the previous Lord of Westmere. He had used it to store important documents, secret letters, and personal mementos. She opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, she found a collection of letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded ribbon. She recognized her father's handwriting on the top letter. As she read the letters, her eyes widened in disbelief. They were correspondence between her father and a close friend, a nobleman who had served as a royal advisor to the previous king, King Henry, Edward's father. The letters detailed a secret agreement between the two men, a pact to protect Westmere from the ambitions of powerful rivals, including Lord Beaumont. The final letter, written just days before her father's sudden and unexpected death, expressed his growing fears about Beaumont's machinations, his suspicion that Beaumont was plotting to seize Westmere. He wrote of his intention to inform King Henry of Beaumont's treachery, to expose his lies and protect his family. Isabel's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter. This was it. This was the proof they needed. This was the evidence that would clear her brother's name, expose Beaumont's guilt, and restore Westmere to its rightful owners. She looked up at Sir Gareth, her eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. "Gareth," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "we have it. We have the proof." He took the letters from her, his eyes scanning the faded script. His expression hardened as he read, his jaw clenching with anger. "This is damning," he said, his voice low and firm. "This will destroy Beaumont." But their triumph was short-lived. As they were leaving the library, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Well, well, well," the voice sneered. "What have we here?" The Lady Isabel returned to her beloved Westmere. And with the king's hound, no less. How touching. They turned to see Lord Beaumont standing in the doorway, a cruel smile on his lips. He was flanked by 2 armed guards, their swords drawn. Isabel's heart sank. They had been discovered. Their plan had failed. And now, they were at the mercy of their enemy. Beaumont stepped forward, his eyes glittering with malice. "It seems your little game is over, Lady Isabel," he said. "You are a traitor, just like your brother. And you, Sir Gareth, are a disgrace to your order. You have betrayed your king, and you will pay the price." Gareth stood tall, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I have betrayed no one, Beaumont," he said, his voice cold and steady. "I have only sought the truth. And the truth is that you are a liar, a thief, and a traitor." Beaumont laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "The truth?" he scoffed. "The truth is whatever I say it is. I have the king's favor. I have the power. And you have nothing." He gestured to his guards. "Seize them," he ordered. The guards moved forward, their swords raised. Isabel and Gareth were trapped, their backs against the wall. The echoes of a forgotten past, the secrets revealed in the old letters, now seemed to mock them. They had found the truth, but it might be too late. The fortress had become a trap, and the hunter was now the hunted. Chapter 9. The Price of Defiance. The guards lunged, their steel flashing in the dim light of the library. Sir Gareth reacted instantly, drawing his own sword with a swift, fluid motion. He parried the first blow, the clang of metal echoing through the chamber, and then, with a powerful thrust, disarmed one of the guards. Isabel, though unarmed, stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. She would not cower before Beaumont. She would not beg for mercy. She would face her fate with courage and dignity. Gareth fought with the skill and ferocity of a seasoned warrior, his movements precise and deadly. He drove back the remaining guard, forcing him to retreat towards Beaumont. "You cannot win, Fitzrohan," Beaumont sneered, his face contorted with rage. "You are outnumbered. You are surrounded." "I am not afraid of you, Beaumont," Gareth retorted, his voice cold and steady. "And I will not let you harm Lady Isabel." Beaumont's eyes narrowed. He saw the determination in Gareth's gaze, the unwavering commitment to protect Isabel. He realized that he had underestimated the knight, that he had made a dangerous enemy. He gestured to the disarmed guard, who had retrieved a heavy mace from the wall.
"Kill him," Beaumont ordered.
"And bring the woman to me." The guard, a burly brute with a cruel face, advanced towards Gareth, the mace raised high. Gareth met his attack with a swift counter, his sword deflecting the blow. The two men engaged in a fierce struggle, the clash of steel against steel echoing through the library. Isabel watched in horror, her heart pounding with fear. She knew that Gareth was a skilled warrior, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. She had to do something, anything, to help him. She looked around the library, her eyes searching for a weapon, anything she could use. Her gaze fell upon a heavy, bronze candlestick standing on a nearby table. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. She crept towards the table, her movements slow and cautious, trying to avoid attracting Beaumont's attention. He was focused on the fight, his eyes glued to Gareth and the guard. As the guard raised the mace for another blow, Isabel seized the candlestick and, with all her strength, brought it down on the back of the guard's head. The guard crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Gareth, momentarily surprised, took advantage of the opening and disarmed the remaining guard with a swift, decisive move. Beaumont stared at them, his face a mask of shock and fury. He had not expected this. He had not anticipated Isabel's courage, her willingness to fight. You dare to defy me?" he stammered, his voice trembling with rage. "I defy your tyranny, Beaumont," Isabel said, her voice ringing with defiance. "I defy your lies. I defy your cruelty." Gareth stepped forward, his sword pointed at Beaumont's chest. "It is over, Beaumont," he said. "Your reign of terror is at an end." Beaumont looked from Gareth to Isabel, his eyes filled with hatred. He knew that he was defeated. He had lost. But he was not about to surrender. He had one last card to play. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, silver whistle. He put it to his lips and blew a shrill, piercing blast.
"Guards,"
he shouted.
"to me."
"Treason!" The sound of running footsteps echoed through the castle. Reinforcements were on their way. Gareth and Isabel exchanged a look. They knew that they were trapped. They had won this battle, but they had lost the war. "We have to go," Gareth said, his voice urgent.
"Now."
He grabbed Isabel's hand and pulled her towards a hidden door at the back of the library, a secret passage that led to the castle gardens. They fled through the passage, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. They were running for their lives, their freedom, their future. The price of defiance was high, and they were paying it with every step. The fortress had betrayed them, and the hunter, though momentarily wounded, was still in pursuit. The whistle's echo was a haunting reminder. They were still prisoners, not of walls, but of circumstance, of a king's decree, and of a love that dared to bloom in the shadow of treason. Chapter 10. Beneath a Velvet Sky. They burst out of the secret passage into the cool night air of the castle gardens. The moon, a sliver of silver in the velvet sky, cast long, eerie shadows across the manicured lawns and sculpted hedges. The scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine hung heavy in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the beauty that had once graced this place, now tainted by Beaumont's cruelty. The sounds of pursuit were closer now, the shouts of the guards and the clang of armor echoing through the gardens. Gareth pulled Isabel behind a tall, ancient yew tree, its branches providing a temporary shield from prying eyes. "We need to reach the stables," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "If we can get horses, we might have a chance to escape." Isabel nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She knew that their chances were slim. The castle was surrounded, the gates were guarded, and Beaumont's men were searching for them everywhere. They crept through the shadows, avoiding the well-lit paths and the watchful eyes of the guards. They moved with stealth and precision, their every sense heightened, their bodies tense and alert. As they neared the stables, they heard the sound of voices, the snorting of horses, the jingle of harnesses. A group of guards were patrolling the area, their lanterns casting flickering circles of light. Gareth and Isabel ducked behind a low stone wall, their bodies pressed close together. Isabel could feel the warmth of Gareth's body, the steady beat of his heart. She drew strength from his presence, from his unwavering determination to protect her. They waited, their breath held, until the guards had passed. Then, with a swift, silent movement, Gareth led her towards the stables. The stables were dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of hay and horses. The animals shifted restlessly in their stalls, sensing the tension in the air. Gareth quickly located 2 sturdy mounts, a black stallion for himself and a chestnut mare for Isabel. He saddled them with practiced ease, his movements swift and efficient. As they were preparing to mount, a shout rang out from the entrance to the stables. "There they are! Stop them!" A group of guards, alerted by the noise, came rushing towards them, their swords drawn. Gareth pushed Isabel onto the mare's back.
Go,
he shouted.
Ride.
I will cover you. Isabel hesitated, her eyes filled with concern. But Gareth, go. He repeated, his voice firm. I will be right behind you. He drew his sword and turned to face the approaching guards, his body a shield between Isabel and her pursuers. Isabel knew that she had to trust him. She had to obey. She dug her heels into the mare's flanks and urged her forward, out of the stables and into the night. She rode like the wind, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She could hear the sounds of fighting behind her, the clang of steel, the shouts of men. She prayed that Gareth would be all right, that he would be able to escape and join her. She reached the castle gates, which were miraculously open. A small detail she noticed and questioned, that perhaps escape was, inexplicably, what Beaumont wanted. A lone guard stood watch, his back to her. Isabel, on impulse and filled with panic, lowered and charged, knocking him off his feet. She rode through the gates and into the open countryside, the cool night air whipping at her face. She did not stop. She did not look back. She rode until she reached the edge of the forest, the dark trees offering a semblance of cover. She dismounted, her legs trembling, her body exhausted. She waited, her heart aching with fear and anxiety, for Gareth to appear. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. The silence of the forest enveloped her, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the hooting of an owl. Finally she saw him. He emerged from the trees, riding the black stallion, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, his armor dented and scratched. But he was alive. He was safe. Isabel ran towards him, tears streaming down her face. He dismounted and caught her in his arms, holding her close, his body trembling with relief. I thought I had lost you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I told you I would be right behind you, he said, his voice husky. They stood there, beneath the velvet sky, their bodies entwined, their hearts beating as one. The dangers they had faced, the fear they had overcome, had forged a bond between them that was stronger than any chain, any decree, any threat. They had escaped the fortress, but they were still fugitives, their future uncertain. Yet, in that moment, all that mattered was that they were together, alive and free. The price of defiance had been paid, but the reward, the fragile, forbidden love that had blossomed between them, was worth more than anything in the world. The open sky, free of walls, held a different kind of challenge. It was vast, unprotected. And somewhere out there, Beaumont was waiting. Chapter 11. The Lion and the Rose. They rode for days, avoiding main roads and villages, seeking refuge in the dense forests and remote countryside. They slept under the stars, sharing meager meals of bread and cheese, their bodies exhausted, their spirits weary. But despite the hardship and the danger, a sense of peace settled over them. They were together, free from the confines of the castle, free from the watchful eyes of their enemies. They could be themselves, without pretense, without fear. They talked for hours, sharing their stories, their dreams, their hopes. Isabel learned more about Gareth's past, his childhood in a small village, his training as a knight, his years spent fighting in the king's wars. She saw the man beneath the armor, the gentle soul beneath the warrior's facade. Gareth, in turn, learned more about Isabel's love for Westmere, her devotion to her people, her unwavering determination to clear her brother's name. He saw the strength and resilience within her, the fire that burned bright despite the darkness that surrounded her. Their love, forbidden and impossible, blossomed in the wilderness, nurtured by shared hardship and mutual respect. They stole moments of tenderness, a gentle touch, a lingering gaze, a whispered word of affection. They knew that their future was uncertain, that their love might be doomed, but they embraced the present, savoring every precious moment together. One evening, as they camped by a clear, rushing stream, Gareth took Isabel's hand, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love. "Isabel," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I know that we are fugitives, that our future is uncertain. But I cannot deny my feelings any longer. I love you. I love you more than anything in the world." Isabel's heart overflowed with joy. She had longed to hear those words, to know that her feelings were reciprocated. "I love you too, Gareth," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have loved you from the moment I saw the kindness in your eyes, even when I believed you my enemy." He leaned in and kissed her, a tender, passionate kiss that sealed their love, a promise of a future that they might never have. The stream babbled beside them, the stars twinkled above them, and in that moment, they were lost in each other, oblivious to the dangers that surrounded them. But reality soon intruded. They knew that they could not remain in hiding forever. They had to find a way to clear their names, to expose Beaumont's treachery, to restore Westmere to its rightful owners. They decided to seek refuge with a distant relative of Isabel's, a reclusive nobleman named Lord Alaric, who lived in a remote manor house deep within the northern forests. Alaric was known for his wisdom and his independence, and he was rumored to have little love for King Edward or his court. They reached Alaric's manor after a long and arduous journey. The manor was a sprawling, ancient structure, built of gray stone, surrounded by towering trees. It was a place of solitude and silence, a refuge from the turmoil of the outside world. Alaric, a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes and a long white beard, greeted them with cautious hospitality. He listened to their story, his expression grave, his gaze unwavering. "Lady Isabel," he said, "I have heard whispers of your plight. I know of Beaumont's treachery, and I know of your courage and Sir Gareth's honor." He paused, his eyes searching theirs. "I will help you," he said. "I will provide you with shelter, with food, with protection. But I will also help you find a way to clear your names, to expose Beaumont's lies, to restore Westmere to its rightful owners." Isabel and Gareth were overwhelmed with gratitude. They had found a safe haven, an ally, a protector. Alaric led them to a secluded wing of the manor, a suite of rooms that had been unused for years. The rooms were spacious and comfortable, furnished with antique furniture and tapestries. It was a welcome change from the rough conditions they had endured on their journey. "Rest now," Alaric said. "You're safe here, and tomorrow we will begin to plan our next move." As they settled into their new surroundings, Isabel felt a sense of hope, a renewed determination to fight for her future. She had found love, she had found an ally, and she had found a place of refuge. The Lion, Gareth, and the Rose, Isabel, were now under the protection of an unexpected benefactor. But the game was far from over. Beaumont was still out there, and the king's court was still a dangerous place. Their respite was temporary, a calm before the storm. They had found a moment of peace, but the war for Westmere, and for their love, was far from won. Chapter 12. A Dance of Daggers. Lord Alaric proved to be a valuable ally. He was a shrewd strategist, a wise counselor, and a powerful advocate. He had connections throughout the kingdom, contacts in the king's court, and informants in Beaumont's own household. He spent days poring over the letters Isabel had found in her father's box, studying the evidence, analyzing the details. He questioned Isabel and Gareth relentlessly, probing for weaknesses in their story, anticipating Beaumont's counterarguments. He also sent out his own spies, gathering information, verifying facts, confirming suspicions. He discovered that Beaumont had been systematically undermining Westmere for years, spreading false rumors, manipulating the king, preparing for his eventual takeover. He also learned that Beaumont was not acting alone. He had allies in the king's court, powerful nobles who coveted Westmere's lands and resources, who were willing to support Beaumont's treachery in exchange for a share of the spoils. "This is a conspiracy," Alaric said, his voice grim. "A web of deceit that reaches to the highest levels of the court. We must be careful, very careful. One wrong move, and we will all be destroyed." He devised a plan, a daring and dangerous gamble that could either restore Isabel and Gareth to their rightful positions or condemn them to death. He proposed that they return to the king's court, not as fugitives, but as accusers. They would present their evidence to the king, expose Beaumont's treachery, and demand justice. It was a risky plan, fraught with peril. The king was known for his volatile temper, his susceptibility to flattery, and his unwavering loyalty to those he favored. Beaumont had the king's ear, and he would use his influence to discredit Isabel and Gareth, to paint them as traitors and liars. But Alaric had a plan to counter Beaumont's influence. He had a contact in the king's court, a powerful noblewoman named Lady Eleanor, who was known for her independence, her integrity, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Eleanor was a childhood friend of Alaric's and a distant relative of the late queen, and she had long suspected Beaumont of treachery. Alaric sent a message to Eleanor, outlining the situation, presenting the evidence, and requesting her help. He knew that Eleanor was their only hope of gaining a fair hearing before the king. While they waited for Eleanor's response, Isabel and Gareth spent their days preparing for their return to court. They practiced their speeches, rehearsed their arguments, anticipated the king's questions. They also spent time together, cherishing their moments of privacy, strengthening their bond, reaffirming their love. They knew that their future was uncertain, that they might be facing their final days together, but they refused to let fear consume them. One evening, as they were walking in the manor gardens, Gareth took Isabel's hand, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love. "Isabel," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "whatever happens, I want you to know that I will always love you. You are my life, my heart, my soul." Isabel's heart overflowed with love. She leaned in and kissed him, a tender, passionate kiss that spoke of their devotion, their commitment, their unbreakable bond. "And I will always love you, Gareth," she whispered, "no matter what fate may bring." The response from Lady Eleanor finally arrived. She agreed to help them. She had arranged a private audience with the king, a chance for Isabel and Gareth to present their case, to expose Beaumont's treachery. It was a victory, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. But it was also a challenge, a test of their courage, their resilience, their love. They prepared to leave Alaric's manor, to return to the king's court, to face their enemies. They knew that they were walking into a trap, a dance of daggers where one wrong step could mean death. But they were ready. They were united. And they were determined to fight for justice, for Westmere, for their future. The Lion and the Rose were ready to face the king, armed with truth and love, but surrounded by a court of vipers. The dance was about to begin. Chapter 13. The Serpent's Kiss. The king's court was a whirlwind of activity, a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and scents. Nobles in rich silks and velvets, ladies in elaborate gowns and jewels, knights in gleaming armor, servants hurrying to and fro, musicians playing lively tunes, the air filled with the murmur of conversation, the laughter of courtiers, the clink of glasses. Isabel and Gareth, disguised as minor nobility from a distant province, entered the court with trepidation. They felt like outsiders, strangers in a strange land, surrounded by potential enemies. Lady Eleanor, a striking woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes, greeted them warmly. She led them to a secluded alcove, away from the prying eyes and curious ears of the courtiers. "You must be careful," she warned them. "Beaumont has spies everywhere. He knows you are here, and he will do everything in his power to discredit you." Isabel and Gareth nodded, their faces grim. They knew the dangers they faced. They were walking into a lion's den, surrounded by predators. The private audience with the king was scheduled for the following day. Isabel and Gareth spent the evening preparing, rehearsing their arguments, anticipating the king's questions. They were nervous, anxious, but also determined. They had come too far, risked too much, to back down now. The next morning, they were summoned to the king's chambers. The room was opulent, decorated with rich tapestries, gold ornaments, and priceless works of art. King Edward, a large, imposing man with a stern face and a commanding presence, sat on a raised throne, his eyes fixed on them. Beaumont stood beside the king, a smug smile on his lips. He looked confident, assured of his victory. Isabel and Gareth approached the throne, bowing low. Isabel presented their case, her voice clear and steady, her eyes unwavering. She spoke of Beaumont's treachery, his illegal seizure of Westmere, his oppression of her people. She presented the letters from her father's box, the evidence of Beaumont's conspiracy. The king listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Beaumont, however, interrupted frequently, his voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. He accused Isabel of lying, of forging the letters, of trying to incite rebellion. "She is a traitor, Your Majesty," Beaumont said, his voice filled with venom. "Just like her brother. They should both be imprisoned, executed." The king turned to Gareth, his eyes narrowed. "And you, Sir Gareth," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You were once a loyal knight. What possessed you to betray your king, to side with these traitors?" Gareth stood tall, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I have betrayed no one, Your Majesty," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I have only sought the truth. And the truth is that Lord Beaumont is a liar, a thief, and a traitor to the crown." Beaumont's face turned purple with rage. "You dare to accuse me?" he shouted. "I, who have served the king faithfully for years." "You have served yourself, Beaumont," Gareth retorted. "You have used your position to enrich yourself, to oppress the innocent, to undermine the very foundations of the kingdom." The king slammed his fist on the armrest of his throne. "Enough," he roared. "I will hear no more of this. This is a matter for the courts to decide. I will appoint a royal commission to investigate these accusations. And until then, both Lady Isabel and Sir Gareth will remain under house arrest." Isabel and Gareth were stunned. They had hoped for a swift resolution, a clear victory. But the king had chosen to delay, to postpone the inevitable. Beaumont, however, was not satisfied. He wanted immediate action, swift retribution. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive, "these traitors are dangerous. They should be imprisoned, not kept under house arrest. They might try to escape, to incite rebellion." The king hesitated, his eyes flickering between Isabel, Gareth, and Beaumont. He was torn between his loyalty to Beaumont and his desire for justice. Suddenly, Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. "Your Majesty," she said, "I believe I have evidence that will shed further light on this matter." She produced a small, ornate box, intricately carved with serpents. "This box," she said, "was found among Beaumont's possessions. It contains letters that reveal his true intentions, his plans to overthrow the crown and seize the throne for himself." Beaumont's face paled. He knew that box. It contained incriminating evidence, letters he had written to his co-conspirators, outlining their plans for a coup. He had thought it safely hidden, but somehow, Eleanor had found it. This was the serpent's kiss, the kiss of death to his reputation. The king's eyes widened in shock. "What is the meaning of this?" Beaumont?" he demanded. Beaumont stammered, trying to deny the accusations, but his voice faltered, his confidence shattered. The king ordered the box to be opened. The letters were read aloud, revealing Beaumont's treachery in all its gruesome detail. The king's face turned red with fury. He had been betrayed, deceived by a man he had trusted, a man he had considered a friend.
"Guards!" he roared.
"Seize him. Lord Beaumont is under arrest for high treason." The guards moved swiftly, surrounding Beaumont, disarming him, binding his hands. He looked stunned, defeated, his dreams of power and glory shattered. Isabel and Gareth watched in disbelief. They had won. They had exposed Beaumont's treachery. They had saved Westmere. The Serpent's Kiss had sealed Beaumont's fate, and the truth, at long last, had prevailed. But the victory felt bittersweet. The court was a dangerous place, and even with Beaumont's fall, their future remained uncertain. Chapter 14. Where Shadows Lie. The arrest of Lord Beaumont sent shockwaves through the king's court. The whispers, the rumors, the speculations flew like wildfire. The seemingly untouchable nobleman, the king's close advisor, had fallen from grace, exposed as a traitor, a conspirator. Isabel and Gareth were released from house arrest, their names cleared, their honor restored. They were hailed as heroes, saviors of Westmere, champions of justice. But they knew that the victory was not complete. Beaumont had been the face of the conspiracy, but he was not the only one involved. There were others, powerful nobles who had supported his treachery, who had hoped to benefit from his success. These hidden enemies remained in the shadows, their identities unknown, their intentions unclear. They posed a continuing threat, a danger that lurked beneath the surface of the court's glittering facade. King Edward, shaken by Beaumont's betrayal, ordered a thorough investigation. He appointed Lady Eleanor to lead the inquiry, trusting her integrity and her unwavering commitment to justice. Eleanor worked tirelessly, questioning witnesses, examining documents, uncovering the hidden connections between Beaumont and his co-conspirators. She discovered a network of corruption that reached deep into the heart of the court, a web of deceit that threatened the stability of the kingdom. Isabel and Gareth assisted Eleanor in her investigation, providing her with information, sharing their insights, helping her unravel the complex threads of the conspiracy. They found themselves drawn back into the world of courtly intrigue, a world they had hoped to leave behind. They had to navigate the treacherous currents of power, to discern friend from foe, to uncover the truth while protecting themselves from their enemies. One evening, as they were working late in Eleanor's chambers, reviewing documents, a messenger arrived with a sealed letter. The letter was addressed to Isabel, and it bore the crest of a noble family she did not recognize. Isabel opened the letter with trepidation. The message inside was brief and cryptic. "Meet me at the old chapel at midnight. I have information that will help you. Come alone." Isabel was suspicious. It could be a trap, a lure to draw her into danger. But it could also be a genuine offer of help, a chance to uncover more of the conspiracy. She showed the letter to Gareth and Eleanor. They were both wary, urging her to be cautious. "It is too dangerous, Isabel," Gareth said. "You cannot go alone. It could be Beaumont's allies, trying to silence you." "I agree," Eleanor said. "We must send someone in your place, someone who can assess the situation, determine if it is safe." But Isabel was determined to go. She felt a sense of urgency, a belief that this meeting could be crucial to uncovering the remaining conspirators. "I have to go," she said. "I cannot ignore this opportunity. But I will be careful. I will not take unnecessary risks." Gareth, despite his reservations, agreed to accompany her, but at a safe distance, following unseen in the shadows. He would not leave her unprotected. At midnight, Isabel arrived at the old chapel, a deserted, crumbling structure on the outskirts of the castle grounds. The air was cold and damp, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the hooting of an owl. She entered the chapel, her heart pounding with apprehension. The interior was dark and shadowy, the only light filtering through the broken stained glass windows. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, slender man dressed in dark clothing. His face was hidden beneath a hood. "Lady Isabel," he said, his voice low and muffled. "I am glad you came. Who are you?" Isabel asked, her voice steady, despite her fear. "And what information do you have?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the chapel, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I cannot reveal my identity," he said. "But I can tell you that Beaumont was not the mastermind of the conspiracy. He was merely a pawn, a tool used by others." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. This was what she had suspected. "Who?" she asked. "Who were the real masterminds?" The man leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "They are powerful nobles close to the king," he said. "They control the treasury, the army, the courts. They are untouchable." He named 3 names, 3 of the most powerful and influential nobles in the kingdom. Isabel was stunned. She had never suspected these men. They were known for their loyalty, their piety, their unwavering support of the king. "I do not believe you," she said, her voice trembling. "These men are honorable." The man smiled, a cold, cynical smile. "Honor is a cloak, Lady Isabel," he said. "It can hide many sins. These men are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are the true enemies of the kingdom." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, sealed scroll. "This scroll," he said, "contains proof of their treachery. It is a list of their names, their plans, their secret communications. Take it to Lady Eleanor. She will know what to do." He handed the scroll to Isabel. Just as she took it, a figure emerged from the shadows behind the man, a figure wielding a dagger. "Traitor!" The figure hissed and plunged the dagger into the man's back. The man cried out in pain and crumpled to the floor. Isabel screamed. Gareth, who had been watching from the shadows, rushed forward, his sword drawn. He engaged the attacker, a swift and brutal fight ensuing. Isabel knelt beside the fallen man, trying to help him, but it was too late. He was dead. The attacker, seeing that he was outnumbered, fled the chapel, disappearing into the night. Gareth and Isabel were left alone, with the body of the murdered man and the scroll, the evidence of a deeper, more dangerous conspiracy. The shadows had spoken, revealing a truth more terrifying than they could have imagined. The game had just become far deadlier, and the stakes impossibly high. Chapter 15. The Weight of a Crown. The murder in the old chapel cast a dark cloud over the court. The sense of unease, of suspicion, of hidden dangers intensified. The king, already shaken by Beaumont's betrayal, was now faced with the chilling realization that the conspiracy was far more extensive, far more insidious than he had imagined. Isabel and Gareth, along with Lady Eleanor, presented the scroll to the king. The names listed within, 3 of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom, sent shockwaves through the court. These were men who had enjoyed the king's trust, who had held positions of power and influence for years. King Edward, his face pale and drawn, ordered the immediate arrest of the 3 nobles. He was furious, betrayed, and determined to root out the remaining conspirators, to cleanse his court of the corruption that had festered within it. The arrests were met with resistance. The 3 nobles, wealthy and influential, had their own private armies, their own loyal followers. The court was on the brink of civil war, the kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. Gareth, with his military experience and his reputation for unwavering loyalty, was appointed by the king to lead the royal forces. He was tasked with maintaining order, suppressing any rebellion, and bringing the remaining conspirators to justice. Isabel, meanwhile, worked closely with Lady Eleanor, using her knowledge of Westmere and its surrounding areas to gather intelligence, to identify the conspirators' allies, to uncover their hidden networks. They worked tirelessly, day and night, their lives constantly in danger. They faced threats, intimidation, attempts on their lives. But they were determined to see this through, to bring peace and justice to the kingdom. The weight of the crown, the responsibility for the safety and well-being of the realm, pressed heavily on King Edward. He aged visibly, his once stern face now etched with lines of worry and fatigue. He realized that he had been blind, that he had allowed himself to be deceived by those he had trusted. He turned increasingly to Isabel and Gareth for advice, for support, for guidance. He saw in them the qualities he had lacked in his other advisors: honesty, integrity, unwavering commitment to justice. One evening, as they were meeting with the king in his private chambers, discussing the ongoing investigation, Edward looked at Isabel and Gareth, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "You have both shown me what true loyalty means," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You have risked your lives to save my kingdom, to protect my people. I am forever in your debt." He paused, his gaze shifting to Isabel. "Lady Isabel," he said, "I have wronged you. I allowed myself to be deceived by Beaumont, to believe the lies he spread about you and your brother. I condemned your brother without a fair trial. I seized your lands, your home. I am deeply sorry." Isabel's heart softened. She saw the genuine remorse in the king's eyes, the pain he was carrying. "Your Majesty," she said, "I forgive you. I understand the pressures you were under, the deception you faced. All I ask is that you restore my brother to his rightful position, that you return Westmere to my family." The king nodded. "It will be done," he said. "I will issue a royal pardon for your brother, and I will restore Westmere to you, with all its lands and titles." He then turned to Gareth, his eyes filled with admiration. "Sir Gareth," he said, "you have served me with unwavering loyalty, with courage and integrity. You have proven yourself to be a true knight, a champion of justice." He paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I wish to reward you for your service," he said. "I wish to offer you a position of great honor and responsibility." He hesitated, his gaze searching Gareth's. "I wish to offer you the hand of Lady Isabel in marriage," he said. "And with it, the title of Lord of Westmere." Isabel and Gareth were stunned. They had never expected this. Their love, forbidden and impossible, was now being offered to them by the king himself. But it was not a simple offer. It came with a price. It meant that Gareth would have to give up his knightly vows, his commitment to serve the king. It meant that Isabel would have to accept a marriage arranged by the king, a marriage that, while desired, still carried the weight of royal decree. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Their love had blossomed in the shadows, nurtured by hardship and danger. Could it survive in the bright light of the court, in the midst of power and politics? The weight of a crown, it seemed, was not just borne by the king. It now rested on their shoulders, a heavy burden of responsibility, of duty, and of a love that had been both forbidden and blessed. Chapter 16. Trials by Firelight. The king's offer hung in the air, heavy with implications, with unspoken questions, with the weight of tradition and expectation. Isabel and Gareth exchanged a long, searching look, their hearts filled with a mixture of joy and trepidation. They had dreamed of this, of a future together, of a love that could be openly acknowledged, celebrated. But they had never imagined it would come like this, as a royal decree, a reward for their service, a political maneuver. They retired to Isabel's chambers, the silence between them thick with unspoken thoughts. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts. "It is unexpected," Isabel said finally, her voice hesitant. "A royal command, disguised as a blessing." Gareth nodded, his face troubled. "It is an honor, Isabel," he said. "A great honor. But it also feels like a gilded cage." He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in thought. "I am a knight, Isabel," he said. "I have sworn an oath to serve the king, to uphold the law, to protect the realm. To accept this offer would mean abandoning that oath." Isabel understood his dilemma. She knew the depth of his commitment, the strength of his honor. She also knew the longing in his heart, the desire for a life with her, a life beyond the battlefield, beyond the court. "And I," she said softly, "am Lady of Westmere. I have a duty to my people, to my family, to my heritage. To accept this offer would mean accepting a marriage arranged by the king, a marriage that, while desired, still carries the taint of obligation." They sat in silence for a long time, the firelight flickering on their faces, illuminating their doubts, their fears, their hopes. "What do we do, Gareth?" Isabel asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love. "We do what we have always done, Isabel," he said. "We follow our hearts. We listen to our conscience. We choose what is right, not what is easy." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Isabel," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I love you more than anything in the world. I want to spend my life with you. But I will not do so at the cost of my honor, of my integrity." Isabel's heart swelled with love and pride. She knew that he was right. Their love could not be built on a foundation of compromise, of obligation. It had to be freely chosen, freely given. "And I love you, Gareth," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to be your wife, but not as a reward, not as a political pawn. I want to be your wife because you choose me, because I choose you, because our love is true and free." They made their decision. They would accept the king's offer, but on their own terms. They would marry, but not as a reward for their service, not as a political arrangement. They would marry because they loved each other, because they chose each other, because their hearts were bound together by a love that had defied all odds. The next morning, they returned to the king's chambers. They knelt before him, their faces composed, their hearts filled with a quiet resolve. Gareth spoke first, his voice clear and strong. "Your Majesty," he said, "we are deeply honored by your offer. We are grateful for your generosity, for your recognition of our service." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "But we cannot accept your offer as it stands," he said. "We cannot accept a marriage that is arranged, that is dictated by duty or obligation." The king's brow furrowed in surprise. He had not expected this. He had expected gratitude, acceptance, compliance. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice sharp. Isabel stepped forward, her voice equally clear and strong. "Your Majesty," she said, "we love each other. We wish to marry. But we wish to do so freely of our own accord, not because it is your command." She paused, her eyes meeting the king's. "We ask for your blessing, your Majesty," she said. "Not your command. We ask for your understanding, your respect for our choice." The king was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Isabel and Gareth. He saw the love in their eyes, the strength of their resolve, the unwavering commitment to their principles. He realized then that he had misjudged them. He had treated them as pawns, as pieces in a political game. He had forgotten that they were individuals with their own hearts, their own minds, their own desires. A slow smile spread across his face. He had been tested, and he had, in a way, failed. But he had also learned a valuable lesson. "Very well," he said, his voice softening. "I understand. I respect your choice. I give you my blessing, not as your king, but as a man who has come to admire your courage, your integrity, your love." He rose from his throne and extended his hand to them. "May your love be strong and true," he said. "May your future be filled with happiness and peace." Isabel and Gareth rose, their hearts overflowing with joy and relief. They had faced their trial by firelight, and they had emerged stronger, their love tested and proven. They had chosen their own path, a path of love, of honor, of freedom. The weight of the crown had been lifted, replaced by the lighter, brighter burden of a love freely chosen, a future freely embraced. Chapter 17. Scars of Honor. The news of Isabel and Gareth's betrothal, blessed but not commanded by the king, spread quickly through the court. It was a cause for celebration, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of love and integrity in a world often dominated by ambition and deceit. The remaining conspirators, their plans thwarted, their network exposed, were brought to justice. The kingdom slowly began to heal, the wounds of treachery and betrayal gradually fading. Isabel's brother, Thomas, was pardoned and restored to his rightful position. He returned to Westmere, greeted by the joyous cheers of his people, his name cleared, his honor restored. Preparations for the wedding began in earnest. It was to be a grand affair, a celebration of love, of justice, of the restoration of peace and prosperity to the realm. But amidst the joy and anticipation, Gareth carried a burden, a secret that he had kept hidden from Isabel, a scar from his past that still haunted him. Before he had met Isabel, before he had become the king's hound, Gareth had been betrothed to another. Her name was Annalise, and she was the daughter of a minor nobleman, a gentle, kind-hearted woman whom he had loved deeply. Their betrothal had been arranged, a political alliance between their families, but Gareth and Annalise had genuinely cared for each other. They had planned a future together, a life filled with love and happiness. But fate had intervened. Annalise had fallen ill with a deadly fever, and despite all efforts to save her, she had died. Gareth had been devastated, his heart broken, his dreams shattered. He had buried his grief in his duty, in his service to the king. He had become the king's hound, a relentless pursuer of justice, a man who showed no mercy, a man who had closed off his heart to love. Until he met Isabel. Isabel had awakened something within him, a spark of hope, a flicker of warmth in the cold darkness of his heart. She had shown him that love was still possible, that life could still be beautiful, that even the deepest wounds could heal. But he had never told her about Annalise. He had kept his past hidden, fearing that it would cast a shadow over their love, that it would diminish his feelings for her. As the wedding day approached, Gareth's guilt grew stronger. He knew that he could not marry Isabel with this secret between them. He had to tell her the truth, even if it meant risking losing her. One evening, as they were walking in the castle gardens, the scent of roses heavy in the air, Gareth stopped and turned to Isabel, his face troubled, his eyes filled with pain. "Isabel," he said, his voice hesitant, "there is something I need to tell you. Something about my past." Isabel sensed the seriousness of his tone, the weight of the unspoken words. She looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of concern and apprehension. "What is it, Gareth?" she asked softly. He told her then, his voice raw with emotion, about Annalise, about their betrothal, about her death, about the grief that had consumed him. He spoke of his broken heart, his closed-off emotions, his fear of loving again. Isabel listened in silence, her heart aching for him. She saw the pain in his eyes, the scars of his past, the burden he had carried for so long. When he had finished, she reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Thank you for telling me, Gareth," she said, her voice filled with compassion. "I understand. I know that your past is a part of you, that it has shaped who you are." She paused, her eyes searching his. "But it does not change my love for you, Gareth," she said. "It does not diminish my feelings. If anything, it makes me love you even more." Gareth's eyes filled with tears of relief. He had feared her rejection, her anger, her disappointment. But she had shown him only understanding, only compassion, only love. "I was afraid," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Afraid that you would think less of me, that you would turn away." Isabel shook her head, her eyes filled with love. "Never, Gareth," she said. "Your past is your past. It is a part of who you are, but it does not define you. I love you for who you are now, for the man you have become, for the love we share." She leaned in and kissed him, a tender, passionate kiss that erased all doubts, all fears, all shadows of the past. Their love was stronger than any scar, any secret, any burden. It was a love that had been tested by fire, by betrayal, by uncertainty, and it had emerged triumphant, pure, and true. The scars of honor, both his and hers, were now a testament to their resilience, their strength, and the enduring power of their love. Chapter 18. The Unveiling of Truth. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect reflection of the joy and hope that filled the hearts of Isabel and Gareth. The entire kingdom seemed to rejoice, celebrating the union of two souls who had overcome adversity, who had fought for justice, who had found love in the midst of chaos. The ceremony was held in the Grand Cathedral, a magnificent structure adorned with stained glass windows, soaring arches, and intricate carvings. The air was filled with the scent of incense and flowers, the music of the choir soaring to the vaulted ceilings. Isabel, radiant in a gown of white silk and lace, adorned with pearls and diamonds, walked down the aisle on the arm of her brother, Thomas, her heart overflowing with happiness. She saw Gareth waiting for her at the altar, his eyes shining with love, his face beaming with pride. Gareth, resplendent in a tunic of deep blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread, stood tall and proud, his heart filled with a love that surpassed all understanding. He saw Isabel approaching him, a vision of beauty and grace, his heart swelling with a joy he had never thought possible. They exchanged their vows, their voices clear and strong, their eyes locked in a gaze of unwavering love. They promised to love each other, to cherish each other, to support each other through all the trials and tribulations that life might bring. The king himself officiated the ceremony, his voice filled with emotion, his eyes glistening with tears. He had witnessed their journey, their struggles, their triumphs. He had seen their love blossom in the darkness, a beacon of hope in a world filled with shadows. As they were pronounced husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the assembled guests, a wave of joy and celebration that echoed through the cathedral. Isabel and Gareth, their hearts intertwined, their futures entwined, embraced, their love sealed forever. The reception was held in the great hall of the castle, a lavish feast filled with music, dancing, and merriment. Nobles from across the kingdom, dignitaries, courtiers, and commoners alike, gathered to celebrate the union of Isabel and Gareth. But amidst the festivities, a shadow lurked. A final, hidden piece of the puzzle remained to be revealed. As Isabel and Gareth were greeting their guests, a young woman approached them, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She was dressed in simple clothing, a stark contrast to the opulent attire of the courtiers. "Lady Isabel," she said, her voice trembling, "I must speak with you. It is a matter of great importance." Isabel, sensing the urgency in the woman's voice, led her to a secluded alcove, away from the noise and bustle of the reception. Gareth followed, his hand resting protectively on Isabel's arm.
"What is it?"
Isabel asked, her voice filled with concern. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously.
"My name is Alara," she said.
"And I was Lord Beaumont's mistress." Isabel and Gareth exchanged a surprised look. This was unexpected. "I know things," Alara continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Things that were never revealed during the trial. Things that implicate others." She told them then, her voice trembling with emotion, of Beaumont's secret meetings, his whispered conversations, his hidden documents. She spoke of a final, desperate plan that Beaumont had hatched, a plan to assassinate the king and seize the throne for himself. But Beaumont had not acted alone. He had had a partner, a co-conspirator, someone who had provided him with the resources, the connections, the plan itself. And that person, Alara revealed, was none other than Lady Eleanor. Isabel and Gareth were stunned. Eleanor, their ally, their friend, the woman who had helped them expose Beaumont's treachery, was now revealed to be the true mastermind behind the conspiracy. "I do not believe you," Isabel said, her voice shaking. "Eleanor would never." "She did," Alara insisted. "She used Beaumont, manipulated him, played him for a fool. She wanted the throne for herself, and she was willing to do anything to get it. She produced a small, silver locket, intricately carved with a serpent coiled around a rose. This locket," she said, "belonged to Eleanor. Beaumont gave it to me as a token of his affection. It contains a miniature portrait of Eleanor and a secret compartment." She opened the locket, revealing the portrait, and then, with a delicate touch, she pressed a hidden button, revealing the secret compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, rolled-up piece of parchment. Alara handed the parchment to Isabel. "This is a letter," she said, "written by Eleanor to Beaumont. It outlines their plan, their intentions, their ultimate goal." Isabel unrolled the parchment and read the letter, her eyes widening in disbelief. It was all there, in Eleanor's own handwriting, the evidence of her treachery, her ambition, her cold-blooded manipulation. The unveiling of truth was complete. The final shadow had been dispelled, the final enemy revealed. Their friend had been their foe, their ally, their betrayer. The celebration had turned into a revelation, and the dance of daggers had finally reached its climax. Chapter 19. Beyond the Castle Walls. The revelation of Lady Eleanor's treachery sent a new wave of shock and disbelief through the court. The woman who had been hailed as a hero, a champion of justice, was now exposed as a villain, a mastermind of conspiracy. Isabel and Gareth, their hearts heavy with betrayal, confronted Eleanor with the evidence. Eleanor, initially defiant, broke down and confessed, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. She revealed her motives, her ambition, her deep-seated resentment of the king, her desire for power. She had used Beaumont as a pawn, manipulating him, exploiting his weaknesses, all for her own selfish gain. King Edward, devastated by this final betrayal, ordered Eleanor's immediate arrest. She was stripped of her titles, her lands, her possessions. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, her dreams of power and glory shattered forever. The court, once a place of intrigue and deception, was finally cleansed. The conspirators had been brought to justice, the kingdom was safe, and peace had been restored. Isabel and Gareth, their duty fulfilled, their names cleared, their love triumphant, decided to leave the court. They had seen enough of the darkness, the treachery, the ambition that lurked beneath the glittering surface. They returned to Westmere, to the home they had fought so hard to reclaim. They were greeted as heroes, as saviors, as the embodiment of hope and justice. They rebuilt Westmere, restoring it to its former glory, creating a haven of peace and prosperity for their people. They ruled with wisdom and compassion, guided by the principles of fairness, of justice, of love. They lived a simple life, far from the intrigues of the court, surrounded by the beauty of the countryside, by the loyalty of their people, by the enduring strength of their love. They spent their days tending to their lands, caring for their people, raising their children. They found joy in the simple things, in the laughter of their children, in the beauty of the sunset, in the quiet companionship of each other. One evening, as they were sitting on the terrace of their manor, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, Isabel turned to Gareth, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. "We have come a long way, Gareth," she said, her voice soft. He nodded, his hand reaching for hers.
"We have," he said.
"We have faced many challenges, overcome many obstacles, but we have done it together. And we have found our happiness," Isabel said. "Beyond the castle walls, beyond the intrigues of the court, beyond the shadows of the past." Gareth smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "We have built our own kingdom, Isabel," he said. "A kingdom of love, of peace, of justice." They sat in silence for a long time, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with a contentment that surpassed all understanding. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, not in a royal decree, but in the simple, enduring power of their love. They had learned that true happiness was not to be found in power, in wealth, in titles, but in the bonds of love, in the loyalty of friendship, in the simple joys of everyday life. They had left the castle walls behind, but they had built something far more enduring, a love that would last a lifetime, a legacy that would inspire generations to come. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged victorious, their love a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. The realm beyond the castle walls stretched before them, filled with promise, with peace, and with the enduring strength of their love. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. Years passed, like the gentle turning of seasons, painting the landscape of Westmere with the vibrant hues of life and love. Isabel and Gareth, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces etched with the lines of time and laughter, ruled their lands with wisdom and compassion. Their children, strong and vibrant, grew like saplings, reaching for the sun, embodying the hope and promise of a new generation. But even in their idyllic haven, echoes of the past lingered. The scars of honor, though healed, remained a reminder of the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the love that had endured. One crisp autumn day, a royal messenger arrived at Westmere, bearing a summons from King Edward. The king, now old and frail, wished to see Isabel and Gareth one last time. They journeyed to the king's court, a place they had long ago left behind, a place that held both bitter and sweet memories. They found the king weakened, his body failing, but his spirit still strong. He greeted them with warmth, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and regret. He had never forgotten their service, their loyalty, their unwavering commitment to justice. "Isabel, Gareth," he said, his voice weak but clear, "I have called you here to make amends. I have wronged you both, in the past. I allowed myself to be deceived, to be manipulated. I caused you pain, suffering." He paused, his gaze shifting to Isabel. "I condemned your brother without a fair trial," he said. "I seized your lands. I almost destroyed your lives." He then turned to Gareth. "And you, Sir Gareth," he said, "I tested your loyalty, your honor. I forced you to choose between your duty and your love." He sighed, his eyes filled with remorse. "I have learned much in these passing years," he said. "I have learned that true power lies not in wealth, not in titles, but in justice, in compassion, in love." He reached out and took their hands, his grip surprisingly strong. "I wish to rectify my mistakes," he said. "I wish to offer you a final gift." He gestured to a royal scribe who stepped forward, holding a sealed document. "This document," the king said, "officially restores all of Westmere's ancestral lands, titles, and privileges to Lady Isabel and her heirs, in perpetuity. It also bestows upon Sir Gareth the title of Royal Protector, a position of great honor and responsibility, charged with safeguarding the realm and upholding justice." Isabel and Gareth were deeply moved. It was a final act of reconciliation, a recognition of their service, a validation of their love. But Gareth, his heart filled with a quiet resolve, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice respectful but firm, "we are grateful for your generosity, for your recognition. But we have found our happiness, our peace, beyond the walls of the court, beyond the demands of duty." He paused, his gaze meeting Isabel's. "We have built a life together, a life of love, of simplicity, of service to our people. We do not seek titles, power, or recognition." He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "We have learned that true happiness lies not in the trappings of royalty, but in the bonds of love, in the loyalty of friendship, in the simple joys of everyday life." The king looked at them, his eyes filled with understanding. He saw the strength of their love, the depth of their commitment, the wisdom they had gained through years of hardship and triumph. He nodded slowly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Very well," he said. "I understand. I respect your choice." He took the document from the scribe and, with a trembling hand, tore it in two. "Go then," he said, his voice filled with a newfound peace. "Live your lives. Love each other. Be happy." Isabel and Gareth bowed low, their hearts filled with gratitude. They had faced the reckoning of love and duty, and they had chosen love, a love that had transcended all boundaries, all expectations, all limitations. They returned to Westmere, to their home, to their family, to their people. They lived out their days in peace and contentment, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The reckoning had come, and love had prevailed, not as a prize, not as a reward, but as a freely chosen path, a journey shared, a life lived fully, in the heart of a kingdom built not on power, but on love. They were home, and they were free. Their choice echoed the final wishes of the king, to live, love, and be happy, a simple decree that held more power than any crown. Epilogue. The wind whispered through the ancient oaks of Westmere, carrying the scent of wildflowers and damp earth, a familiar fragrance that spoke of home, of peace, of enduring love. Isabel, her hair now silver, her face etched with the gentle lines of time, stood on the terrace of the manor, gazing out at the rolling hills, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Gareth, his shoulders still broad, his eyes still holding that familiar spark of warmth and strength, joined her, his hand reaching for hers, their fingers intertwining, a silent gesture of a love that had weathered the storms of life, that had blossomed in the shadows and flourished in the light. Their children, now grown, with families of their own, were gathered below, their laughter echoing through the gardens, a melody of joy that filled Isabel's heart with contentment. The legacy of Westmere, of their love, of their unwavering commitment to justice, lived on in them, a promise of a future filled with hope and possibility. Isabel leaned her head against Gareth's shoulder, her heart overflowing with gratitude. They had lived a full life, a life filled with challenges and triumphs, with sorrows and joys, with the enduring power of love. They had faced betrayal, treachery, the machinations of a corrupt court. They had fought for justice, for their home, for their future. They had chosen love over duty, freedom over obligation, happiness over power. And they had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, not in a royal decree, but in the simple, everyday moments of a life shared, a love freely given, a legacy built on compassion, on integrity, on unwavering faith in each other. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange, purple, and gold. The stars began to appear, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. Isabel and Gareth, their silhouettes outlined against the fading light, stood together, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They had built their kingdom, not of stone and mortar, but of love and laughter, of family and friendship, of justice and peace. And as the night descended, wrapping Westmere in its gentle embrace, Isabel and Gareth knew that their love story, their journey, their legacy, would live on, whispered on the wind, carried in the hearts of their children, a timeless tale of a love that had conquered all. The hunter had found his prize, and the prize had found her home, not in a castle, but in a love that knew no bounds, a love that would endure for all time. The echoes of their choices, their courage, and their unwavering devotion would resonate through the generations, a testament that true strength lies not in power, but in love.
And